Celebrate the fact that we've seen the back of another black day. Black day. I want to take you in my arms, forgetting all I could do today. Black day, black day.
Hi guys, and welcome to Piano and Keyboard Artists, where we discuss the artists related to pianos, keyboards and synthesizers. And continuing with the Depeche Mode album review series, this is Black Celebration Part 5. If this is your first time to this channel, I would like to welcome you with open arms and hope you will hit the subscribe button and you will join this fabulous community here. Now this is Part 5 of the Black Celebration album review. Links to all the previous reviews are below. I've also compiled all the previous album reviews into playlists so you can binge watch them if you want to. And without any bragging, this is, as far as I'm aware, the most in-depth Depeche Mode album review series ever conducted by any YouTuber everywhere, including, interviews with the likes of Brian Griffin and producers and a lot more. So with that out the way, let's jump into part 5. So in parts 1, 2, 3 and 4 we have spoken about all the different aspects of the album. We've covered the composition, we've run through the songs, we've talked about the production, some general aspects to the production, some history about the album. We've also talked about the vocals and lots more. And in this final part 5, we're going to speak about the gear. We're also going to talk about the singles and the B-sides, and then we're going to have the 5 questions at the end with the album review. So grab yourself a cup of tea or a drink or whatever you're into, and let's do this. Right, so let's talk about some of the gear that was used in the production of Black Celebration. Now, before I jump into the gear list, guys, I did tell you that my good friend Simon Forsyth and I were going to go on a little road trip where we're going to head off to a studio where a mutual friend of ours has to look at some of the gear. Long story short, that hasn't happened because of, it's a long story, but we will get to that. And also, I'd like to tell you that later on in the Geek Talk series, very soon actually, we're going to be rolling out a Synth Legends where we're going to cover pretty much as many synthesizers as what we can get our hands on, and cover a synthesizer in every separate episode of Geek Talk. But that is coming soon. So for the purposes of this video now, I'm just going to run through the list of the synthesizers that we used. Now, there are all types of rumors and stuff out there. Now, I did reach out to Gareth Jones late last year after a lot of you asked me to interview him. He was very gracious. I emailed him in the morning and funny enough, he emailed back later on that evening. And he did say, Vaughan, thank you very much for, reaching out to me. Gareth basically said something along the lines of, I've said everything I've needed to say about Depeche Mode, and I understand that. I was a little bit disappointed. I would have loved to have interviewed Gareth Jones on this series. It's just that I think he's probably Depeche Moded out with all the interviews, and I understand that, and I respect him for actually getting back to me and for being so gracious. But looking at the gear, I'm going to run through some of the synthesizers in no particular order. Now, remember, it was 1986, so a lot of the synthesizers that were available would have been a lot of new synthesizers, but also synthesizers that they had, from the beginning, from the 81 period, from the Speak and Spell period. Now, just running through some of this list, and this list is not conclusive. Once again, they would have had access to the Roland ProMars, the Roland Jupiter 8, the Waves PPG-2, the ARP 2600, and I'm sure this was used quite extensively. There was also the Moog Source, the Mini Moog, Yamaha CS5, the Synclavier 2, which was also a big player, Yamaha DX7 was also available, the Oberheim OB8, and of course the Fairlight. But the real sort of star of the sort of the last two albums were the emulator, the EMU emulator. Now the EMU emulator was obviously built by the EMU company, and with the original emulator coming out in 1981, it was then upgraded to the Emulator 2, which came out in 1984. So this would have been the machine that I believe they would have had used quite extensively, and you could see it on tour quite a lot. So when my friend Simon Forsyth and I start the synthesizer reviews on the Geek Talk series, we will hopefully gain access to a Emulator 1 and 2, and we will be able to go through them in a lot more detail. And I'm happy to say that my good friend Simon does not only know this on a very theoretical level, he knows it on a very, very deeply geeky level as well. So that'll be very, very interesting to delve into it. But just a few things about the emulator. The emulator was essentially if you're not a musician, it wasn't a synthesizer, it was a sampler. And we all know that a sampler is essentially like a tape recorder. It's a playback machine. So you buy it and you turn it on, it's got no sounds in it. Although you did have sounds on it that were on a floppy disk, and you would load those sounds into it from the floppy disk. I don't want to go too much into that. As I say, we'll cover that on the Geek Talk. Interestingly enough about the emulator is, and my friend Simon will explain this to you guys in detail as well, is this was an 8-bit machine. So the emulators were really sort of like the core of the, a very big part of the Depeche Mode sound, and especially in live situations. You could see these sampling keyboards used extensively in their live performances, especially from about 1984 on the Some Great Reward tour, and then right through to sort of Devotional, where they, obviously released a higher version. And I know that Emulator stopped making the sampling keyboards around about 2002. I know there have been various incarnations. There was the emulator, there was the Emulator 2, then the Emulator 3, Emulator 4. Then of course you have the Emacs. Then of course there were rack mount versions like the E4XT, the Turbo, and I remember these from my geeky days when I used to work as a music salesman in Turnkey, which was a music retail store in London. I have read in interviews with Alan Wilder, especially the challenge of having these machines in a live situation, because essentially you had floppy disks and you had to wait for the machine to load up. So you can imagine the backing track will start the tape machine starting, and you've got the backing music playing, and now you've got these keyboards that need to load their sound. So you'd tap, you'd have a bang for every sound. And the challenge was trying to get the keyboards to load up in time, but Alan said the way around that was to create extended intros, and of course it was meticulously thought out. Also there was backup built into it, in case something went down, and things did go down. And also what's interesting is, although it's a playback machine, not all playback machines are equal. Now this was an 8-bit playback device. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of what what bitrate is. We'll discuss that in Geek Talk. But interestingly enough, this machine had a particular sound, and we're going to talk about that extensively. Simon explains nicely how there is a certain kind of grit and an edge to this machine. Once you've recorded a sound, remember not every playback machine is the same. If you recorded it on a different machine like a synclavier, and you recorded the same sound on this machine, the kind of the color and the nuance to the sound would be different. But that's obviously a deeper subject to go into. The emulators came out and they were very attractively priced because they were very affordable. Now, when I say affordable, they were affordable in the sense that a synclavier would set you back $30,000. Whereas when the emulators came out, they were sort of the $8,000 mark, which is, a quarter of the price. Now, it's still a lot of money, and that is why back in those days, you couldn't really get into music production or electronic music, and unless you were quite well off. Pros and cons of today, a lot of people these days, because it's so affordable. And the downside to that is a lot more people do it, but long story. Remember, if you go back to the previous episodes in this album review series, I think it was part 2 or part 1, where we spoke about some of the production techniques, and check out videos of Gareth Jones where he talks about how they used to use acoustic spaces. They were obsessed with how you could use the sound of a room to create atmosphere and give color to a sound. Gareth Jones was very, very instrumental and came around at the right time, because he was really cutting edge at the time. And, you know, sampling at this stage in 1986 was not new. It was kind of, you know, a lot of bands had kind of jumped onto it at this point. But coming back to the gear, although Depeche Mode had access to the gear that pretty much all the other top bands are using at the time, I always say it's not the gear that you have, but it's the way you use it. And Depeche Mode, you know, in conjunction with their philosophy of, I guess, always trying to sound a little bit different, and Martin's songs being very different, and that in conjunction with their philosophy of, you know, never use the same sound twice, no guitars, and making every album sound different, Depeche Mode definitely had the edge. And we see in Black Celebration how they had really sort of reached the apex of their creativity. And on a final word, the emulators really were an affordable way to get into sampling if you couldn't afford, you know, a Synclavier. But of course, $8,000 was still way beyond the budget of the average musician. And yeah, that's a long story. But as I say, I'm looking forward to that in-depth Geek Talk series where we're going to go in-depth about all these synthesizers. Right, the singles and the B-sides. Depeche Mode, to me, were the band when I was younger that's really sort of introduced me to the concept of remix. And this was, I believe, where Daniel Miller was a very, very clever man, is a very clever man. And I think Depeche Mode made a lot of money from the sort of remix contest, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but Depeche Mode, to me, they kind of paved the way for the sort of remix, I won't say the remix culture, but I just remember them, they would release a single, and then there would be, on the B side of the single, there would be a different song. And they would typically release 3 or 4 singles, you know, to promote an album. But Depeche Mode, some of my fondest memories of Depeche Mode's music are the, you know, the remixes that were, and the different versions that came, you know, with their singles, you know, the B-sides. And this really was a great time, and it's very different now. I mean, I don't want to jump into a separate subject, but the word remix to me now is kind of like, it's a little bit of a cringe word to me at the moment, and that's no disrespect to people who do remixes. I have done remixing, and I know remixing is very essential when you're sort of getting into production, because it's easier to remix something than it is to, you know, compose something from scratch. And, you know, as a result, the whole sort of remix culture thing has kind of just, you know, gotten out of hand. You know, people will say, oh, have you heard this remix? Have you heard this? Oh, I just don't have the ears for it anymore. But once again, not to insult anyone, because there are some great remix artists out there. The first time I heard the word remix was when I was younger, and I became familiar with Depeche Mode's work. And of recent day, it seems as though the sort of remix thing and the sort of singles that Depeche Mode put out, I don't know, maybe I've just missed my eyes off the ball, but this sort of golden period, sort of, you know, from the beginning up until about, I'd say, Violator, that point was just like the highlight as far as, you know, remixes and, you know, singles and B-sides and all that. But coming back to Black Celebration, if we look at the singles that they released, there was Stripped, A Question of Lust, A Question of Time, and Not Tonight. Now, but Not Tonight, there was a lot of... Alan Wilder was pretty pissed off about the But Not Tonight, because I believe that But Not Tonight was released as a single in America. To my American subscribers there, if you can validate this. But I know Alan Wilder was very pissed off because, in his opinion, Not Tonight was not a very, very good song. And of course, in the previous album review series, we talk about how Alan Wilder did not want It's Called a Heart to be released. He wanted Fly on the Windscreen to be released. And I think Alan Wilder does have a very, I mean, the guy's got edge. He really does. And it's interesting when you see him. He's such a gentleman, and and he's so rational. But his mind's dark, and I love it.
Warning! Warning! Alan Wilder, fanboy alert! Warning! Warning!
So coming back to Not Tonight pissing Alan off, you must remember the philosophy Depeche Mode had when they had a lot of so Depeche Mode are a band of a lot of rituals, and they still have a lot of rituals apparently. But when they made an album, I mean, a song like Stripped, you can read up about it. I believe it took weeks to produce and it took about 10 days to mix. Because when it came to their albums, the approach and the attention to detail was meticulous, very, very meticulous. And then the approach to a B-side was very different. As Gareth Jones talked on a documentary, a B-side was almost like a fun project. Not that making the albums weren't fun, but Depeche Mode did put heart and soul, and they sweated blood and tears to really make the album stand out. But the approach for a B-side was more like, okay, let's have a bit of fun with this. Let's write, produce, and mix this song in a day. And that was very much the sort of the thought process behind a lot of the sort of the B-sides, and that's probably why they got them out quicker. So I think, to add insult to injury, you take a song like Stripped, which was very radical, very cutting edge, took them weeks to produce, took them several days to mix, and then America says, we want Not Tonight. And that did piss Alan off, because I think Alan just saw it as a sort of like a throwaway song, which was, produced and mixed and everything in an afternoon, whereas, Stripped was a complete... Not Tonight, but I love Not Tonight. I think Not Tonight is one of those songs that gets a bad rap, and particularly in the last few live shows, the last few concerts, I love that Martin's incorporated into the acoustic set. I always loved that song, and I'm not shy to say I always loved it. I think because it's really melodic. It's the... Oh God, it's raining, but I'm not... It's a beautiful song, and what I'm going to say now is probably blasphemous. I don't want to start any blasphemy. What I'm about to say is quite blasphemous, but I actually like Not Tonight more than a song like It's Just a Question of Time. I do. I just find it more sort of melodic. And once again, as I'm going to demonstrate on another series, on my sort of strip down of the B-sides, if you take But Not Tonight just as a piano ballad, I mean, just illustrating it, it's a beautiful song, and I can see why Alan got pissed off. Yeah, it's probably not on the level of Stripped as far as production goes, but I think as if you played that to sort of people, the general public, they would probably like Not Tonight above Stripped, and I can see why it pissed Alan off. And it did go on to, it became the soundtrack to some cheesy movie in the 80s. But anyway, it pissed Alan off, but that's all in the past. But Not Tonight, not one of their best songs, but it's one of my guilty pleasures. I really, really like it. Okay, so let's look at some of the tracks that were on the singles. So if we look at the Stripped single, these are the 12-inch singles which they released. So Stripped, this was one of my favorite singles of the whole Depeche Mode collection, was the Stripped 12-inch. And it started off with a Highland mix. And the Highland mix I love because it just started off with the sparse. And it just started and built up in a different way. Track 2 on that was the Not Tonight, the extended. Now the Not Tonight extended I did like more than the sort of the 7-inch Not Tonight. The extended Not Tonight was definitely my favorite of the two. Breathing in Fumes. Fresh up the pills, you're breathing in fumes. I love the way they gave it this kind of locomotive. I love Breathing in Fumes. You're breathing in fumes. Awesome. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Then there was the Fly on the Windscreen Quiet Mix. That was like basically like a death is everywhere. Death is everywhere. But just, it had no drums and percussion. It was just kind of, and it was very shouty sounding. I really liked it. And then I loved Black Day, Black Day. Basically taking the lyrics from Black Celebration and then just reworking it in a very sort of, it reminded me like a cowboy movie. It had a real sort of western sound. Like I could just imagine them in like a western town, you know, with their spurs and their cowboy hats. Celebrate the fact that we've seen the back of another black day. I want to take you in my arms, forgetting all I couldn't do today. Black day, black day. Yeah, it does remind me of a sort of like a cowboy town, you know. Yeah, it was very dark and claustrophobic. I love that. And in the beginning of this video, you saw I should do like a piano cover of that. Celebrate the fact that we've seen the back of another black day. Black day. I want to take you in my arms, forgetting all I couldn't do today. Black day, black day. Just got like real it's got a real sort of western sound. It's a bit like it's got that kind of feel to it. But we all know that Martin's always had a soft spot for country and the kind of western sound, and we see that. But a point for yet another video. If we look at the Question of Lust single, the 12-inch single, the first track was Question of Lust, obviously. I love Question of Lust, I really do. And then Christmas Island, what a fascinating track. Oh, it sounds so eccentric. What a fascinating track. I mean, what a fucking awesome track. Absolutely a really scary, creepy, edgy. And, you know, this illustrates particularly the brilliance of Alan Wilder.
Warning. Warning. Alan Wilder, fanboy alert. Warning. Warning.
And coming back to the philosophy they had for the B-sides, where you should, you could do a whole B-side track in a day. You know, that was, there wasn't the pressure on them when they did a B-side. It was just more like they didn't question themselves. And they've done some fantastic B-sides. If you listen to Christmas Island, you can hear a lot of the sounds and the sort of samples from Black Celebration being used on this Christmas Island track, amongst sounds from other songs. But yeah, Christmas Island. And it's funny, I think a lot of you will agree that some of these B-sides, although they were quite, I won't say they were throwaway with B-side songs, but they were just not as precious. But very often when we listen to albums, we sometimes think, I sometimes feel that a lot of the B-side songs are actually better than some of the album tracks, but of course that's open to debate. And then the next track on the 12-inch Question of Lust single was People Are People, was a live version. It Doesn't Matter 2, an instrumental version, and A Question of Lust, a minimal version. Now you must remember there are so many different incarnations and versions and releases depending on which country you're in, especially in the Oriental countries. There's some bizarre combinations. A lot of my subscribers have sent me photos of releases that were never sort of like official sort of mute Depeche Mode approved releases, with just bizarre combinations of songs and everything. But as I say, I'm just going for this particular series discussion. I'm just talking about the singles, the 12-inch singles that were released. As I say, in different countries, it was, different compilations. Right, then there was the Question of Time 12-inch single, and the first track on that was Question Time, which was an extended remix. There was a Black Celebration live, Something to Do live, Stripped live. And then there was also another, apparently another one, which another 12-inch Question of Time, which started off with Question of Time, Newtown mix. The second track was A Question of Time, a live remix. There was a Black Celebration, Black Tulip mix, and there was More Than a Party remix. I haven't actually heard that one, and I know there's people out there who are very, very hardcore, so I'd love to hear from you. Yes, and then of course there was the Not Tonight, which was a single, I believe, only in America, but correct me if I'm wrong. My friends, as I start talking and as I do these, as I'm filming these episodes, and I think, I only need to talk about the gear and the B-sides, I realize that even in a 5-part series, there is so much more we can talk about. And yeah, we can go so much deeper, but all good things must come to an end. And I really feel we've covered Black Celebration in, as much depth that I feel is satisfying to someone. Let's say if you weren't a Depeche Mode fan, and if you watched the Black Celebration review, I believe it would explain things to you pretty well. But as far as a hardcore fan like myself and you, it's probably not enough. It's never enough. Right, so let's get on to the 5 questions, shall we? 5 questions. This is the part you've all been waiting for. Okay, so question number 1. If you were to lose a song from this album, now it's very difficult. I know we talk about how, when I listen to a Depeche Mode album, like a lot of you, I never Depeche Mode's one of those bands that doesn't go on my playlist when I'm, out and about, like in my earphones. I always give Depeche Mode the respect. And the only time I really listen to Depeche Mode is if I'm fully engaged in it. I like to listen to it with a glass of wine and my headphones. And whenever I put Depeche Mode on, it's almost become like a ritual to me. I would never just listen to a Depeche Mode song. I always listen to an entire album. So if I feel like listening to Stripped, then I go, oh, no, I've got to listen to the whole album. I'll set it down. And to me, a ritual is when I listen to a Depeche Mode album or song. I don't listen to a song, I listen to an entire album. So you listen, and I just love the way there is such a great narration in their albums, the way their albums flow from beginning to end. So coming back to the point I'm making is, if you had to lose a song from here, it's very difficult to make that decision. But let's say, for argument's sake, they said to you, we're re-releasing this, but we do need to lose a song. I would probably choose Sometimes. And, when I choose to omit a song, it's not that it's a bad song, obviously, but it's probably... Is it my least favorite song? Oh, it's hard, but anyway, it's the song I would probably choose to lose, though. Sometimes, only sometimes, I question everything. Question 2 of the 5 questions. Which song on this album do you think is the most radical? And when I say what's the most radical, which song is the most radical, whether it be production or its approach? To me, the most radical, and of course, Depeche Mode being a radical band based on technology and great songwriting, But I would say the most radical track on this, it was a toss-up between Fly on the Windscreen, but I'm going to go with Stripped as the most radical track. Just because of the way, you know, it has like a mesmerizing melody. Check out the previous installment in this where I broke down the songs, and you'll see how haunting and beautiful it sounds if you just played it on a piano. And also, I just love the rhythmic how they use that Harley Davidson motorbike idling sound to form the rhythmic sort of backbone of the song. I mean, that's absolutely genius. And yeah, there's so much to it. And in an up-and-coming series later on, we will be sort of like dissecting songs individually. But yeah. Right, question number 3. Which song have I listened to the most? So that means which song, since I've had this album, have I listened to the most? I would probably say, because I've usually listened to the whole thing from beginning to end, but I would say the song that I've kind of liked the most and listened to the most is probably Stripped. That is one of my all-time favorite Depeche Mode songs. Question 4. Which is my favorite song now? And the reason we have this question is because remember that as your taste changes over the years, you may have had your favorite song may have been Question of Lust, and then, you know, you might find yourself preferring Dressed in Black. But to me, it's probably these days, I'd say Question of Lust. Yeah, that's probably my favorite song now, which I'm really sort of sentimental about. So yeah. And then question 5. What are we going to rate Depeche Mode's Black Celebration out of 10? Guys, Black Celebration is the album where Depeche Mode reached the peak of their creativity from. This was the beginning of the sort of dark, stunning Depeche Mode that we've grown to love. And that's not to say the albums before that weren't stunning, but this is the point where all the creativity and everything came together. And as Martin Gore said, Black Celebration is the album that from this point onwards had like a thread running through it. So this is kind of like, this spawned Music for the Masses and Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion and those great albums that came afterwards. Black Celebration gets a perfect 10. And is that any surprise? An absolutely stunning, groundbreaking album. An album that I think you will all agree with me as Depeche Mode fans is, you know, a lot of you will say that this is your favorite album. This is as good as it gets. I mean, I always hold this up as a, you know, one of the benchmarks for, you know, electronic industrial pop music. Black Celebration is fascinating on so many levels because we talked back in the other previous series and in the history how when Martin presented the demos, Daniel was like, oh no, this isn't going to work. This is just too downbeat. But, you know, it defied all the odds. And as I said, Black Celebration is a concept album. It is a concept album. And, you know, in full respect to them, it was a very dangerous album to release for them because they had had such success. And as we talked in the previous episodes, that by the time they got to this, the stakes were really high. And it's like, when you get to that point, you really, really need to up the ante. So the pressure on Martin was to write good songs. And of course, when he gave the demos to Daniel, and Daniel was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. But it turned out to be the perfect decision. And as I say, Black Celebration is one of my all-time favorite Depeche Mode albums, and I'm sure it is yours too. Right, guys, and that concludes the Black Celebration album review here on the Vaughan George channel. I do want to just mention to you, if you're new to the channel, that my good friend, Mr. Brian Griffin, has made these exclusive Depeche Mode poster prints are available to this channel. This particular one is, there is a collection of 8, and this one is the Black Celebration album cover, but it is in a exclusive to the Vaughan George channel, never been seen before, black and white version. Everything we sell through all these poster prints that we sell through this channel are personally autographed by Brian Griffin himself. If you'd like to get some more interest, please contact me at info@vorti.com. All the information is below. And guys, if you have just joined the channel for the first time now and you want to see the rest of the Depeche Mode album reviews, just check in the description below. I've linked everything to there. As I say, I've also assorted all the album reviews into playlists for those of you who want to binge watch them. So what's next? We now are going to start making preparations for the Music for the Masses album review. Really looking forward to that. As I said, I was in touch with Dave Bascombe's PA. Contacted her on the beginning, in November last year, and Dave Bascombe has agreed to an interview. So I'm so happy to say that we will be interviewing Dave Bascombe. And what's interesting as well is there's not much on YouTube from what I can see. There's a lot about, Gareth Jones and everything, but, I can't find a lot of information on Dave Bascombe. But yeah, outstanding producer who did so many great albums. Right, guys, your homework. Question 1, which song would you lose from this album if you had to lose a song? And the second part to that question is, if you had to lose a song from here and you could replace one of the songs on here with one of the B-sides, which would it be? You might think, oh, get rid of Stripped and replace it with But Not Tonight, just to piss off Alan Wilder. But yeah, that's question 1. And then question 2, which song do you think is the most radical? Question 3, which song do you think you've listened to the most over the years? Question 4, which is your favorite song now? And question 5, what would you rate Black Celebration out of 10? Right, guys, and that concludes the Black Celebration album review series. Looking forward to Music for the Masses, and as always, I'm so grateful to you, and I will see you guys on the next video. Adios.